There's a battle going on between sympathy and stigma. Can we act compassionately without being doormats for the personality disordered? And what responsibility do the mentally ill have to themselves and to us? Next, we'll look at how the media glamorizes the kind of mental sickness that drives a man to have his brow bone shaved or his eyes stretched to look like he was born a different ethnicity. The word for our era is inversion. The narcissistic reversal rules our 21st century lives, urging us to call hate love and pain pleasure. We are all sadomasochists now. All that and more this week on Disaffected. Welcome to Disaffected. I am Joshua Slocum, and this is the show where we look at politics and culture through a psychological lens. And this week, we're going to be talking about identity and responsibility. Got a lot for you this week, so let's jump right into it. I've mentioned this on the show before, and I want to expand on it a little bit. Explanations are not excuses. And I wrote something about this, but I never stay on script, so I'm going to read a little bit and then probably interject. What we're going to talk about in this show is going to touch on how we as a society are to conceive of mental illness, how we treat people with mental illness, what we do about mental illness, what our responsibility is, what our ethical and moral responsibility is in terms of people who live among the mentally ill, but also what are the responsibilities of people with mental illness, whether those mental illnesses are the sort of more sympathetic and approachable ones like depression or anxiety, or if we're talking about something like a cluster B personality disorder. What are the responsibilities that we have, and what are the responsibilities that people with mental illness have? And I mentioned this, I've mentioned it a couple times before, but explanations for behavior that come from mental illness are simply that. They are explanations. They show you the moving parts, the causal chain, how we got where we got. But explanations are not excuses. They're not a hall pass for bad behavior, right? And of course, you have to think about the difference between the kinds of mental illness where a person loses control of their behavior. And there are mental illnesses like this. You know, there are plenty of mental illnesses where people are actually psychotic, meaning they are out of touch with reality. They may believe that somebody is standing in front of them who isn't really there. They might believe in an elaborate and paranoid plot in their head that's just entirely implausible. And they may take actions based on those false beliefs. And we extend, and I think we should extend, a great deal of leeway to people who really cannot control their behavior. But there's a very big gray area between I can't control my behavior and I don't want to control my behavior. I don't enjoy controlling my behavior. And if I'm in a situation or if I'm in a culture where I'm likely to be excused for bad behavior, then I'm going to take that excuse. And I think there's a lot more of that going on right now in the world that we live in than actually floridly psychotic people who can't help themselves. It's about a failure to take moral responsibility for the way we live our lives. We talk on this show all the time about the narcissism, the abuse of other people that we see so frequently, the lies, the smear campaigns, the making people budge over and give up their space for people who shouldn't be entitled to take space from them. And when people object to this, the big example we're going to talk about in this episode, when women object to men who call themselves trans women being in their locker rooms, competing on girls' sports teams, when people object to this, the objectors are often shouted down. They are looked at as if they are committing a moral or ethical sin by failing to be understanding. Well, she can't help it. He can't help it. Can't she? Can't he? I think these questions are a lot more open than our reaction to them would suggest. I think there's a lot of room for controlling behavior, and I think that we have removed most of the incentives for people to control their bad behavior. Not only have we removed the incentives, but we have replaced them with incentives to engage in bad behavior. We applaud it. We call it authentic. We call it righteous. We call it justice, right? And this is very frequently found in political activist groups, whether we're talking about groups that call themselves LGBTQ, alphabet soup people, whether we're talking about Antifa, whether we're talking about Black Lives Matter, or we're talking about radical feminist groups. It really doesn't index to the political position so much as it seems to correlate with groups that have in what could be described as radical or transformative politics. The sorts of things that I found very attractive and that I participated in for a long time now look much, much more toxic to me than they did when I was inside them. And people want to be sympathetic to people with mental illness, or people whom they perceive have mental illness, or people who claim they have mental illness. And this is an improvement over a society that merely mocks the deranged or says, you're simply insane, go be locked up, go be in a straitjacket. But I think the pendulum has swung way too far. I think that, and I'm not even sure if this was true, but I think that we have this idea, or we got this idea in the 20th century, that all sort of mental health care and things that we used to call asylums, that everything was like something out of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm not sure that was ever true, but we seem to have, we act as though that were true. And so the pendulum has swung all the other way. And during the 1980s, when a lot of the mental health facilities, the inpatient institutions, were shut down, and people were, well, what did they call it? It was, mainstreaming is what they called it when they started to put intellectually disabled children into regular classrooms. But I think they called it in the 80s community care, when the mentally ill were turned out of psychiatric hospitals and onto the street. And look what we've got. The vast majority of people who are homeless are mentally ill. These are people who should be in care. But we've decided that it's better for them to make their way in the world, and we're supposed to be understanding, and we're supposed to care for them in the community. I don't see a lot of community care going on here. You can feed homeless people, you can give them shelter, you can give them a bed, you can even get an apartment for them, but as many people are finding out, simply changing the material circumstances is not going to help a population who is overwhelmingly severely mentally ill. Yes, it's true that anybody can find themselves bankrupt who isn't mentally ill. These things happen from time to time, but it is not the majority of people who end up in the homeless population that has exploded in American cities. These are mentally ill people. And this idea, it's as if we perform that we care for these people, but we don't actually give them care because we don't like the kind of care that they actually need. We don't like institutions. We don't like to think about segregating people. And so we are walking among florid schizophrenics, severely personality disordered people, psychopaths, drug addicts. These things are often a case of yes and, not either or. And if we really cared the way we say we do, we'd be looking at doing this differently. We might be looking at considering going back to having more psychiatric beds open for people. But that would require us to face some hard truths. And one of those hard truths is that there are some people who are either so mentally ill or so severely personality disordered that they are in fact going to continue to remain to be a danger to the community. Not just to themselves, to the community. People who suffer from certain kinds of mental illnesses are not the only people who suffer. Those around them suffer. Their families suffer. Their coworkers suffer. The people on whose streets they're camping out suffer. We have to get to terms with that. We're not doing a very good job of it. And well, that's probably enough about that. I want to look at a more specific example. Very good article was written on the website Unheard, UNHERD.com. The article was by Unheard's science editor, Tom Chiverds, and it's about a situation that happened with a novelist named Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Some of you may know her. She is a feminist figure. She's a novelist. She's got some cachet. I think she's pretty well known on the cultural left. And Adichie wrote a pretty extraordinary piece called "It Is Obscene" recently, where she described, and I'm going to describe this as I see it. She didn't use these words, but I know what I'm looking at. Where she described two younger writers that in some sense she had some contact with, a mentor-mentee relationship, who turned out to be extraordinarily manipulative and dishonest people, and people who look to me like they probably have a cluster B personality disorder. I'll use Tom Chivers' article to fill you in on this. So he says, last week, the novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie published a blog post called "It Is Obscene." It referred to her experiences since she did an interview with Channel 4, in which she said that, quote, "trans women are trans women," end quote. That is, she did not say that she thought trans women are women without caveats, although she has been a longtime campaigner on LGBT issues. Two young writers who she knew personally, she said, had accused her publicly of transphobia. One had called for people to, quote, "pick up machetes," end quote, to defend trans people from the, quote, "harm she caused," end quote. And as I said a moment ago, one of these writers was a mentee, if you will, of Adichie. She was somebody that Adichie had taken under her wing, had given professional advice to, had over to her home. And I'm going to quote a little bit from Adichie's own article describing this. And she's talking about, this is interesting. She's talking about how she ignored her intuition and she ignored the vibe that she was getting from these people. My first sense of unease with her came when she posted a photo taken in my house at a time when I did not want any photos of my personal life on social media. I asked that she take it down. The second case of unease was her publicizing something I had told her in confidence about another member of the workshop. The most upsetting was when she, without telling me, used my name to apply for an American visa. Above all else was my lingering suspicion that she was a person who chose as friends only those from whom she could benefit. But she was a bright young Nigerian feminist, and I allowed that sentiment to override my unease. End quote. That's very, very important. When I talk about tells on this program, when I list for you the ways that people behave, sometimes the ways they style themselves visually, the way they present themselves, when I say that you should be making a list in your head of tells that ping you, that give you a small feeling in your gut, this is what she's talking about too. It's intuition. And unfortunately, that word has taken on a connotation that's sort of woo-woo and metaphysical. And I don't think there's anything metaphysical about it. I think intuition is real, but I think intuition is subconscious processing of actual, real physical world sensory information that happens at a subconscious level that we can't quite articulate, but it gives us a feeling. I don't think it's metaphysical. I think that's just the way the human mind works and integrates sensory data. So she's telling you that she ignored her intuition. And ignoring it brought these people closer to her and gave them more opportunities to act in an exploitative way. And so what were some of the things that happened? Well, this woman she's talking about that she mentored, her first published book, in the biography portion of the book, she used Adichie's name for clout. She hadn't asked for permission, but she bigged herself up by talking about her association with this more prominent writer. This is one thing that bothered Adichie. I'm going to go back to Tom Chivers' article talking about this. And I should say, what's interesting about this article, and I'll get into this, is he's bringing up some of the same things that I talk about on this show, about where the line is between being understanding of people with mental illness and looking out for our own interests when those people are exploitative or dangerous to us. So back to Tom Chivers' article. For Adichie, this story was about the sanctimony and emotional aridity of the online left and the ideological orthodoxy which requires people to denounce their friends and to toe unwavering political lines in order to remain part of a chosen Puritan class. I think this is undoubtedly part of the story, but not the whole. And this is where it gets really interesting for me, because he's talking about the very things that bother me and that have to do with the don't diagnose complaint that I've spoken about on this show before. So Tom Chivers starts to talk about the Goldwater Rule. And the Goldwater Rule is a part of a professional code of ethics. Is it either the American Psychiatric or the American Psychological Association? I'm sorry, I very frequently have that brain misspark in my head. It's one of those two. Excuse me. And it refers to the 1964 presidential election. And candidate Goldwater was smeared by a magazine called Fact, where they had quoted some psychologists who said that this man was psychologically unfit. He sued them and he won. And the dust-up over that generated what we know as the Goldwater Rule, which is that mental health professionals should not make a diagnosis of someone they have not examined, and they should not make a statement about that person's mental health without the permission from that person after an examination. So it's a professional rule. Excuse me. But the Goldwater Rule, the ethos of the Goldwater Rule has been picked up on by the general public, and it's part of what animates the don't diagnose complaint that exercises me as much as it does. A lot of people tend to act as if we lay people are, under the same restrictions that a working professional would be. And it has come to mean that people take it to be out of line, uninformed, immoral, or an ethical sin to talk about the mental state of another person who's causing trouble or is behaving fractiously. Back to Tom Chivers. One of the writers who was attacking Adichie had publicly declared a few months earlier that they have dissociative identity disorder, or DID. That is, that they have multiple personalities within one body. They refer to themselves as a system of personalities rather than a single person. Dissociative identity disorder is what we used to call multiple personality disorder. In pop culture, you may be familiar with it from the book and movie Sybil. Before it was called multiple personality disorder, we called it split personality disorder. And I think the first big famous movie about that was the one with Joanne Woodward called The Three Faces of Eve. I don't believe multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. I don't believe it probably exists. I realize that it's still listed in mental health manuals, but I find it very difficult to believe that this is a standalone disorder where people have fully formed personalities inside of them that have their own consciousness entirely separate from the person that is, and that you lose time and don't remember. Dissociation is real, and there may be some rare cases where people are so dissociated that their syndrome begins to look like this. But the way it's used today, I suspect it isn't really real. Back to Tom Chivers. And remember, he said that it wasn't just the ideological orthodoxy of the left that is covering up for this, but there's more to this story, and this is how he explains it. So he talks about dissociative identity disorder and says, this is where I bump up somewhat against the Goldwater Rule. DID is a personality disorder which often presents with or is confused with another disorder called borderline personality disorder. About 70% of DID patients are also diagnosed with BPD, and the two conditions are often considered part of the same spectrum. The diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder include, quote, identity disturbance with markedly or persistently unstable self-image or sense of self, and severe dissociative symptoms. Goldwater notwithstanding, I think it's okay to draw lessons across from one to the other. Diagnoses of the various kinds of personality disorder are very fuzzy. Often people are in several categories or don't fit neatly into any one of them. Both borderline personality disorder and DID are marked by extreme emotional volatility and a lack of a stable sense of self. Yes, he's right. This is a very good article. I do have some criticisms. I'm going to get to them, but it's quite good. More from Chivers. And this is where I start to get into a few objections. You'll be able to anticipate what I'm going to say, loyal listeners and viewers, as soon as I start reading this. I want to be very clear about some things I'm not saying. I'm not saying that all online bad behavior is because of mental health issues or personality disorders. Lots of people are just dickheads, and there's no need to pathologize them. I'm going to break away for a minute and say something about that. I see this objection a lot. There is merit to it, but there isn't merit to all of it. I have had so many instances where I have been talking either in real life in front of other people, or I'm writing something on Twitter or on Facebook explaining the behaviors of cluster B personality disorders, narcissism, histrionic, antisocial, borderline. And what I do is, as you know, you watch this show, you listen to the show, is connect the dots for people to see that behaviors they may be familiar with in somebody they know or somebody they've worked with actually have an explanatory framework that is often something we call a cluster B personality disorder. And one of the objections is, why are you pathologizing everything? Why does everything have to be mental health? Some people are just assholes. Are they? Yes. I mean, and we are all capable of being assholes. I have been an asshole countless times. Many of you out there have been assholes. We can all be an asshole. But when we are talking about people, if asshole is the fundamental term that we would use to reduce somebody down and say, what do I need to know about him? What kind of guy is this? If most people would call him a self-regarding asshole, isn't that what a narcissist is? Isn't that what excessive self-regard and fractious behavior and inability to get along with other people is? It sounds like narcissism to me. So I think that if we describe somebody globally as an asshole, and what does that mean? Maybe they're exploitative, maybe they're disputatious, maybe they hog the microphone and don't let anybody else speak at a party. If this is their constant, if this characterizes their behavior constantly, maybe narcissism is one way that we describe congenital assholism, right? And Chivers is like many people. He wants to be measured. He doesn't want to go too far. That's admirable. It's a reasonable goal. But it starts to cease to make sense, if you know what I mean. So back to Chivers. And I'm not saying that all or even most people with borderline personality disorder or similar disorders end up attacking people online. And while this example is lifted from the trans activism gender-critical forever war, I'm certainly not saying that all trans people have personality disorders or that being trans is a mental illness. Back to me. Again. Why? Why are you certainly not saying that? I'm not saying that every single person who says they're trans has a personality disorder, but I want to know what the motivation is for somebody like you, Tom, to say, I'm certainly not saying that. The motivation, I think, because I hear it from a lot of people, they want to signal that they don't think that trans is a mental illness. Why? Why? What are we looking at here? This reaction is kind of it's a form of dogma. We feel obligated to say it. But again, let us look at the kind of personality structure, the kinds of behaviors, and the kind of mentation that so frequently show up in these people, and then ask ourselves why we're afraid to say this might be a mental illness. Somebody who says that she is a man, even though she has a female body, that her feeling of being a man is so strong and so overpowering that she's miserable and potentially suicidal. She cannot deal with the reality that she has a woman's figure, breasts, a female reproductive system, and usually, not only can she not stand that and needs to have surgery in order to be her true self and to feel stable, but she requires everybody around her to participate in a delusion with her. We have to use male pronouns or she'll kill herself. We have to correctly gender her or she's going to have an emotional breakdown. How is this not mental illness? How? I'm sort of sitting here waiting for somebody to answer me. Of course, there's nobody here but a camera and a microphone. But I don't think anyone does have a good answer for that. And you know why? Because it is mental illness. That's not a slur. That's a statement of fact. And it makes people very, very uncomfortable. And I can imagine, even if somebody is hate listening to this right now, there's a part of you that knows I'm saying something sensible. You know that I'm telling you something close to the truth, if not the truth. That's not normal. It's not stable. That is not a healthy mind. That doesn't mean the person is hateful. It doesn't mean they're stupid. It doesn't mean that it's happy that they're suffering this way. I do not wish them to suffer this way. But I will not participate in a lie and say, no, this is perfectly normal. They just happen to be born in the wrong body and emotionally incapable of being referred to by the pronouns that go with their sex. That's not normal. It's not healthy. And to close this section out, Tom Chivers cites what he calls a marvelously sympathetic written piece by a person with borderline personality disorder. That made my antenna go up a little bit. I mean, what Tom Chivers is writing about is the same approach that most people take. He's not unusual this way. I'm not saying he's wrong to do it, but I do think it betrays an emotional bias on our part. We are primed to see the person described as having a mental illness. We believe that our sympathy is owed to that person. We're happy when we see something sympathetic because we are still functioning under the belief that the worst part of personality disorders and mental illnesses is how much suffering the people with them have and how badly stigmatized they are. I do not agree with that. I don't think their suffering is necessarily more to be attended to first than the suffering they inflict on other people. I think they're suffering to go all the way around. But I'm not willing to put them in the victim who should be coddled category the way most people seem to be. But he's very balanced, and he also says, but one of the cries of our age is to be more sympathetic and understanding of mental health conditions. The trouble is, I find that when people say things like that, they are often thinking of the more acceptable manifestations of mental ill health. People being depressed or anxious, staying home and making cute posts about being introverts. Sorry. It sounds exactly like me. Yes, I find this gratifying. I find it validating. Thank you, Tom Chivers. You don't know me, but you made me feel less alone. He continues. Sometimes, though, mental health issues cause people to behave badly and cause harm to others in ways that are not cute or sympathetic or easily understandable. An old friend with a personality disorder once wanted to write about this on Mental Health Awareness Day. That we're all keen to be aware of mental health when it means somebody being unhappy or anxious. But when it's about psychotic episodes or even less sympathetic disorders, such as psychopathy or narcissistic personality disorder, we're less keen. My friend never wrote the post, but I think it's true. I do too. I do too. We're going to wrap this segment up. Come back after the break, and we're going to look at some videos of surgery. I warn you, there's it's not terribly graphic, but you know, if you've got a sensitive stomach, people are getting their faces rearranged, and it has everything to do with their true identity. So see you on the other side. Hey listeners, we now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us. And thank you. Welcome back. Before we get into the videos that I was preparing you for, I'm a dog with a bone and I can't let go of this. There's something that I didn't get to before the break that's important that I want to say about mental health and our reactions to it. And I'm going to give you one more quote from Tom Chivers near the end of his article. He says, "But we shouldn't pretend that these issues aren't a factor in the sometimes toxic online environment. Puritan attitudes, ideological dogma, hypocrisy, and cant are all part of it as well. But Goldwater Rule notwithstanding, we're missing a part of the story of online discourse if we don't find a way of addressing, sensitively and without stigma, the role of mental health." Yes. Yes, and. Stigma. Stigma, stigma, stigma. I am so tired of that word. Because I'm tired of how we've redefined it. And we have, like with so many other things, we have redefined terms to mean something entirely different from what they used to mean, and stigma is one of them. And if we haven't redefined things, we've inverted them. We call black white, we call up down. As somebody who has had his own mental illnesses for most of his life, and as somebody who's spoken candidly about them and written about them, even addressed them in public talks I've given, yes, I obviously agree that the state of having a mental health problem, of having mental illness, that state itself should not be stigmatized. One should not be, I don't think we should look down on people who have mental illness. But I don't think that's what people are objecting to when they object to the stigma. What they mean by stigma is don't talk about it. Don't talk about it honestly. Don't put any responsibility on the mental health sufferer to get help, to control their symptoms. When we say, okay, let me approach it this way. So when I'm writing about borderline personality disorder, for example, and somebody sees me on social media who hasn't read anything I've written before, one of the first negative reactions that I get, and and it's a common reaction, is stop stigmatizing people with borderline personality disorder. I'm not actually stigmatizing them. I'm not saying that they are a terrible person for having borderline personality disorder. I am not saying that they chose to have borderline personality disorder. I am describing the reality of borderline personality disorder, but I'm describing the reality that most people do not describe. If you go online and do a Google search for borderline personality disorder, for example, you will have to wade through about 90% of the responses that you are going to get are going to be the hug box community for borderline personality disorder, the people who want to make it seem cuddly, the people who say, we just feel more deeply. We just have more emotion. We have more empathy. There's a whole cottage industry devoted to making borderline personality disorder seem like just something that overly histrionic 16-year-old girl that you knew in high school would do. That's a quirky, charming thing. It's not like that. It's not like that. And I think when people say don't stigmatize, what they're really saying is don't talk about it. Don't talk about the bad parts about it. They don't like the fact that it's a disorder, right? They don't like to have to face the reality that it is a state of mind that is abnormal and pathological. And I don't know why. I mean, I have some suspicions, but I don't really grasp why it is so fundamentally terrifying to us to acknowledge that there are some pathological states of mind that are nowhere near healthy, that are destructive to the person and destructive to other people. I want to bring stigma back. I don't want to destigmatize this shit anymore, because that's all we are doing in this society is we're not destigmatizing mental illness, we're destigmatizing terrible behavior. It doesn't make you a terrible person to have a personality disorder, but very frequently, people with personality disorders are terrible people. I know it's a really fine line, and I don't know that I've drawn it quite correctly, but you will find some people with, for example, borderline or histrionic personality disorder who are aware that they have it, who accept that their thinking is distorted, that they engage in things like splitting, that they can be very unreasonable to people they love. They acknowledge that that's true. They take responsibility for it. Some are more successful than others. These are the people, and they're not the majority. I'm sorry, folks. They're not. They're not. That's not most borderlines, but those people do exist. And these are the people who usually, when I'm talking to them, they strike me as somebody who is well on their way to recovery, right? Because they have a realistic idea of how they relate to other people, and they have a realistic idea of what their responsibility is. And I think some of those people would agree with me. I think we need to stigmatize bad behavior, and we need to stop giving hall passes and moral excuses for bad behavior because somebody has a disorder. So that's what I have to say about that. Now, for those of you listening and not watching, we're gonna play a video here of a so-called trans woman having what is called facial feminization surgery. And what you, as you're listening, if you can imagine what you would see, this is a man who appears to be about 30 years old, goes into a surgeon's consultation office, has a camera crew following him around. The camera moves they're going into close up and trying to be artistic. I mean, it's very much, the camera work is adulatory, right? This is a beautiful, brave journey. So take a listen to this.
I identify myself as a trans woman of color. I'm on this journey to reposition everything externally to match everything that's internally.
I have to be myself or die trying.
I have to be myself or die
I say that I have
trying.
anorexia, that every time I look in the mirror, for some reason I see my previous self. Even though people from my past say it's so hard to remember who he was, and we don't see him, Imagine waking up every day uncomfortable in your own skin, looking in the mirror and not quite recognizing the person that you feel internally. It is important for me to get facial feminization surgery because now my facial structure will match my internal expression of who I am. The doctor that I've chose, Dr. Obeng, is a corrective surgery doctor.
So, today is your big day, right?
Today is a big day.
So, in your own words, what are we doing for you today?
We're gonna sand the forehead down, the chin, and then the nose would get balanced to these two, because I really don't want
Shave the forehead down, shave the chin down.
What's beautiful right now is that we're starting to get to a space where everyone's being allowed to operate on a spectrum. One extreme being completely female, the other extreme being completely male. Now what's in between is what you choose.
Okay.
My definition of what being a woman of trans experience is living a reality that is mirroring a cisgendered woman's expression. I want my body to look completely female because that's how I see and that's how I feel. But that's just me.
So, eventually, you would like to have a vagina?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is a time of surgery. Right, so, my philosophy, like I told you, we are going to do what's safe. Okay. I know you're young, probably can do all of this at the same time. If we get to a point where we feel like we need to stop, we'll stop. Because you're young, we're not in a hurry for anything. So, we're going to work our way this way.
Okay.
Okay.
For me, it's scary. What am I gonna see? Am I gonna recognize myself? Am I gonna be happy with these results? Were these the results that I really wanted?
You hear the dramatic music.
Oh.
I think it's gonna be more than just a look, but it will be a new confidence. It will be a new definition of self. After this surgery, I'll be able to reintroduce the real me. So healing for me was nothing at all what I thought it was gonna be. I thought it was gonna be like, day 7, I see bruises, but I'm trucking along. There was so many hiccups along the way. My body was just storing trauma. I think by day 7, I wanted, I wanted to reverse everything. I wanted it to stop, and so much stuff was done to me. And while my body could take it, mentally dealing with it and physically dealing with it was a lot. But today, looking back at it all, I would do it again in a heartbeat, and it feels fucking incredible. This whole surgery, I will say that it changed me. It changed the way I see myself, it changed the way I define myself, it changed the way I introduce myself to the world. I'm now in a space where I understand this isn't my end result. We just got one more surgery, Giselle. It's just that last step where Dr. Obeng's gonna assist me in getting my vagina. I'm defining me and who and what I am, and my female expression is mine. And don't you dare tell me how to be.
Oh. This is a train wreck. It's a train wreck, and it's presented to us as something we should feel awestruck by, something we should feel privileged to have witnessed. It's Frankenstein surgery. For those of you who are listening and couldn't see it, this guy, he had his forehead shaved down, he had his chin shaved down, he had surgery. I'm not exactly sure what was done to his upper and lower eyelids, but he came out of there walking. He looked like a mummy. He looked like a mummy on a walker, with bandages all over his face, his eyes so swollen shut there was barely a slit he could see through. And they take the bandages off, and this enormously swollen face. And he says, I felt like every day my body was storing up trauma. Yeah, because you traumatized your body. You sliced into healthy tissue all the way from your hairline down to your neck. And this was put up by, this was a video from Refinery 29 Beauty, which seems to be some sort of plastic surgery beauty portal that has a big social media presence. And I want to talk about a couple of things he said here. He said that he had tranorexia. Tranorexia. Ask for it by name. It's funny, but it isn't funny, like everything on this show. Because there's some truth to it, right? Anorexics. He said, because when I look in the mirror, I don't see what I see inside myself. And sometimes I see who he used to be. He's trying to create a new self, right? He's trying to become a woman. But even he knows he can't become a woman. And anorexics frequently, I mean, this is what body dysmorphia actually means. We throw it around a lot, and we apply it to a lot of people who say that they're trans, who I suspect probably don't actually have extreme body dysmorphia. They don't actually have this overweening obsession that makes them unable to eat or sleep because they have, you know, this is a condition that occurs in some people, but it's a very small number of people. I think it's a very convenient mental disorder to wear for sympathy, right? But anorexics do. And they often, when they look at themselves in the mirror, they literally see a person who is overweight as you can see their hip bones poking through. It's a known psychological phenomenon. So he's not exactly wrong to call it tranorexia. And you know what else about anorexics? The majority of them have something very close to or outright borderline personality disorder, even if they later recover from it. These two things go hand in hand. In fact, I would love to see... I doubt anybody is doing this study, but they should. How many cases of anorexia were seen at United States clinics that deal with problems like that during the 90s, 2000 to 2010, 2010 to today? I hypothesize that we would probably see a decrease in the number of anorexics that was pretty closely offset by the number of young women claiming to be trans. I'm betting it would go like that, because this is the same family of psychological disturbance. And, I mean, it speaks for itself, doesn't it? Right? And we've always had people like this. We've always seen them on talk shows, but when I was young, you only saw them on Maury Povich. You only saw them on television before the internet. It's everywhere now. It's everywhere, and people applaud it. And when I was looking at this post on Facebook, I saw the usual glurgy, overly sentimental expressions of support, joyous rapture for this man, this beautiful woman. And I picked a couple examples to show you. I'm sure you've seen stuff like this too. The first one, from a woman named Giselle, says, "She is amazing. I love that she has the freedom and ability to express her true self. Get it, girl." Her true self? What's true about that? His entire face is a lie. His hair is a lie. He's walking in there. I was going to say a lace front wig. It's not even a lace front wig. I mean, the guy's walking in there with this long-haired Cher-style wig on, and actually, he did actually look a little bit like Cher, both pre and post-plastic surgery, with this hairline just sitting there. I mean, it was just such an obvious wig. The artifice was so intensely visually right in your face. This is the inversion. This is inverting reality. They're calling something that is traumatic and monstrous to the body beautiful. They're calling the most artificial activity, the most artificial intervention on the human face, and calling it your true self. Next one says, somebody named Cheryl. I love this one. absolutely beautiful. The most important thing in life is self-love, and you have embraced that. Bless you and stay strong. The most important thing in life is self-love. Do you know what that is? That's narcissism. That's narcissism. That's not self-love in an uncomplicated way, in a wholesome way, in a healthy way, in a sustainable way. It is pathological narcissism. And here's the tragic part. People forget this about narcissists, especially about grandiose narcissists. And I'm not saying this guy is a grandiose narcissist. Do I suspect he has borderline personality disorder? Hell yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. But narcissism is part of all of the cluster B disorders. And the thing about narcissists, even the grandiose ones who say that they're the best, they're the smartest, they're the prettiest, they're the studliest, they're the richest, they don't believe any of that. They don't actually believe they're the best. They are, inside, they are terrified. They feel empty because they are empty. There is something wrong with them. There is a whole portion of their personality that does not exist. This is overcompensation. It's compensating for that lack. It's an inversion. Got another video for you. It just gets more and more bizarre. This one is a British guy who calls himself trans-Korean and got eyelid surgery to have typical East Asian eyelids constructed on his face. And I wonder if he's going to get... I'll leave that for after. Let's actually listen and watch this.
Or anyone online as British, because I identify as Korean. That's just my culture. That's my home country. That's exactly how I look now. And I also identify as Jimin. That's my Korean name. But not only that, I know it's a little bit confusing for some people. Nobody's ever come out as Jimin or Korean, but this is something that you guys know if you've followed my journey for the last 8 years. I've really struggled with identity issues, with who I am. You know.
Yeah, I've really struggled with identity issues. Again, connect the dots. This looks like borderline personality disorder. For those of you listening, I'd have no idea how he'd tell how old he is after all that work he's had done on his face, but he's probably somewhere around 22 to 26. I saw the before picture. I don't have it for you. But he just looks like your average white British guy. But now, in this video, he's got his hair bleached out, and the bleached out part is dyed pink. He's talking about his identity issues. He's talking about, I identify as Korean. That's my home country. How is that your home country with that British accent? I mean, possibly. But if so, then maybe he's with a military family and he grew up on base and was educated at a British school, because he certainly doesn't sound Korean. I wonder if he's going to get the same sort of pushback that Rachel Dolezal got. Remember Rachel Dolezal, the white woman, who is an NAACP chapter leader or president, who'd gone to a historically black college, passed herself off as a black woman through extensive tanning and getting her hair very, very curly, and then was absolutely pilloried by society. And I don't have a lot of time to get into this, and I haven't really fully fleshed out my thoughts, but I'm actually more sympathetic to Rachel Dolezal than I think the average person is. Yeah. Do I think she has some personality pathology? Probably. I also think, and I think she said this, that she came from a very abused background. And there are some portions of her biography and her past experiences that make it more understandable why she would have felt a cultural affinity with the black people who were close to her growing up than to her white family. I'm not going to try to globally justify what she did, but I honestly think that this woman has been, the amount of abuse that she's received for 5 or 6 years now is far greater. I think she's paid for her sins, frankly. But I don't think guys like this are going to hear it the same way. Why is that? Why is that different? Why do you see, and you do, you can look these up. Look up some of these man or woman on the street interviews. It's usually a conservative who does it, who will go out and say, okay, so you can change your gender, right? Right? The person on the street, yeah. Can you change your race? Can you be transracial? No. Well, if you can change your gender, why can't you change your race? Well, because gender is a spectrum of blah, 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 blah. Nobody has an answer because there isn't an answer. It is exactly the same thing. It's not different. We've just decided that it is. Because. And asking makes you a bigot. So, we have an update from last week. This is interesting. Remember Mean Mommy from last week on camera, who said that she had to stop her 11-year-old, or excuse me, she didn't even call my 11-year-old. She referred to him as the preteen, and she did it more than once. To stop her 11-year-old from comforting her crying 5-year-old daughter. And she called her daughter, she said that her daughter was using white women's tears to get her way, and that she had to stop her 11-year-old from comforting his younger sister who was crying so that she wouldn't learn that white women could manipulate people with their tears. I mean, it was just dead cold, ice cold, just gave me shivers. Well, Mean Mommy appears to be in an abusive relationship with a friend. I'm going to play a couple of quick videos here from TikTok. This is Mean Mommy. I guess that's her name now on this show, Mean Mommy. With her very good friend, another woman. They both appear to be in their late 20s. This woman is a black woman. And it's a really screwed up dynamic. So let's roll the first one.
Ultra question. So there's one less problematic white person in the world. Hey, Jess.
Yes,
Hey, girl. Do you ever microaggress me?
I sure do.
What happens after you microaggress me?
You let me know, and I apologize, and tell you that I will try to do better next time.
Are you afraid of me?
No.
Are you offended?
No, I'm grateful that you value our friendship enough to even say something with me to even say something to me because you don't have to do that, and so I'm grateful that you did.
Be open to feedback. It's how we change the world.
Oh. Is there a word for this? And I'm going to show you another one in a second, but there's more than just these two. There's a series of videos in which her friend, this black woman, puts the camera on Mean Mommy and makes her recite her racial sins and the things she did wrong. This is a sadomasochistic relationship. She's making her confess her sins and do it in front of the camera and show what a bad white woman she was for this woman's edification. Let's look at the next one.
So here's one that happened between Jess and I. Last year, you texted me saying what?
I had run into one of the preteens classmates at the grocery store, and it was the beginning of COVID, and everybody was wearing a mask, and I didn't recognize her, and I said something to the effect of, like, I don't know who this grown woman is talking to me.
Right. And so the problem with that is we age and sexualize black children all the time. Black children often get shot by the police, and you can read the reports for yourself that we age black children about 5 to 8 years. And so a child who is literally 12 gets aged to 18 all the time. Therefore, they said a black man is running down the street. And so I had to point that out to Jess, that she just aged a child who was literally, 10?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's another microaggression that hit me hard.
Oh my God. So the sin she had to expiate this time was, did you notice again how she refers to her children? The preteen, the preteen. Not even my son, the preteen. And her sin this time is that she was talking to somebody she didn't recognize who she called a woman because she had a mask on, because everybody's got a fucking mask on their face on anymore. And her friend is telling her this is an example of her racism because she should have recognized her. But we age black children. We perceive them to be older than they are so that we can make them responsible. And although she didn't say this, I've seen this conversation before, so that we can try children as adults. So, we won't allow black children to be innocent because we look at them and we assume they are much older. I know people claim this. I have a very hard time believing it. It's way too convenient. So, what's going on here? Who even knows? These poor children. This woman is both abusive to her children. She's emotionally abusive at the very least. But she's being abused herself by this woman. And it could be any number, excuse me, sorry folks for banging in your ear. It could be any number of things going on here. But what could be happening is you might have two people with problems in the narcissism category. One of whom is stronger than the other. And Mean Mommy, I guess her name is Jess, may play the role of the abused person in one context with a stronger person, but when she's with weaker people like her children, she becomes the abuser. It reminds me of my mother's husband. A very meek, mild-mannered man with some intellectual disabilities, soft-spoken, very quiet, very submissive. Never heard a peep out of him. My mother would rant and scream at him, call him filthy names. He would sit there and take it. I felt horrible. And at the end, when all the trouble was happening and I was pushing my mother out of my life, I was afraid that she was going to hurt him because she was threatening to hurt him. She was threatening to assault him with a metal pan. And when my sister and I tried to reach out to him and say, we're going to help you out of this, I saw a side of him I'd never seen before. He became vicious. This mild-mannered man who I thought was as modest as a church mouse became vicious, accusatory, told me I was crazy, threatened to work with my mother to report me to Adult Protective Services for elder abuse. I mean, I had literally never, ever suspected that any of that lived inside of him. He changed based on the context. It's very disturbing. Okay, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about trans women at spas and their reaction to it. Make sure to subscribe to Disaffected on your favorite streaming audio platform so you can take us along for the ride. Find us on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and almost anywhere else you get your podcasts. Welcome back. A couple more for you to round this show out here, all in the vein of inverting reality. I said I wasn't going to say this, but I have to say it. I have it echoing in my head. Just a couple of people. You know, I am one of those people who fixates on the criticism rather than the praise, and I blow it out of proportion. So I just have to work it out of my system a little bit. I'm very, very pleased with the response that you all in the audience have been giving us to the show. Overwhelmingly, you are telling us that this speaks to you, that you've noticed these things, that you are connecting dots, that you're connecting dots from your own family, from your bosses, from relationships that you've had, from what you are seeing when you're on social media, that this means something to you. And it's wonderful because that's why I do this. I think there is an answer to getting out of the psychological morass that this distorted psychology that is so prominent on the left has done to us. And to the extent that I can help do that, and it works for you, it makes me really happy. But I remember a couple of people saying, why are you so obsessed with trans? And I mentioned it on the show before. I'm not obsessed with trans out of proportion to trans's obsession with us. Why does this come up so much on this show? Because it's everywhere. I am not cherry picking. I'm not looking for this stuff. I can't avoid it. I can't sign into Facebook. I can't go on Twitter. I can't look at Instagram. I can't even open my goddamn email at work without being dunned with trans bullshit. So I'm a little more pissed off than I thought. And I am pissed off because I don't want to talk about this constantly. But even at work, in my nonprofit job in a human services field, more and more people who are writing to me, professionals who want my opinion on something, people who are colleagues, pronouns in their bios. I've even been asked recently to appear on radio programs to talk about the subject matter that I do for my day job. And part of the pre-screening now includes tell us your preferred pronouns. You cannot get away from this. It's everywhere. And it's not only everywhere, but people are saying it's not everywhere. The people who say, why are you obsessed with this? They're inverting reality. I'm not obsessed with it. You out there, if you talk about this a lot, you're not obsessed with it either. It's that it's in front of you all the time. We all know that it isn't real. We all know something's seriously wrong here. We know the law has gone off the rails. We know that women's rights and girls' rights are in danger, and we're not allowed to say it. I say it on the show every week. So many of you are trying to say it. So many women and feminists are trying to say it. You never hear that reflected on CNN, in the New York Times, on MSNBC, on NPR, on any of them. It's all pro-trans all the time. And if they even mention, they will go to events that are trans themed. And if anybody there disagrees with what's going on in the program, they are called a bigot. Mothers trying to protect their children are called bigots. It's so bizarre. So what happened this week? We're very video heavy this week, but I'm not going to give you video for this. I'm just going to describe it. You can look this up. Many of you will have seen this. There's a spa in Los Angeles called We Spa, W-I. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but who knows? I believe it was a Korean-style spa, segregated by sex. Men go in one side, women and girls go in the other. And it's the kind of place where you can strip off and be nude in a hot steam sauna. There are activities, there are refreshments. You can play chess with somebody. You can get a manicure, all the things that happen at spas. Well, video came out on social media this week of a woman in absolute high dudgeon. Oh, she was glorious. She went up to the reception desk and talked to the staff and said, why is there a man with his dick swinging coming into the women's nude area of the spa? She's wrapped in a towel. She's got a bathrobe on. She was furious. She was invoking the name of Jesus. Oh, this woman was righteous. And she said, I have a little girl in here. There are girls in here. This man walked in here. His dick is swinging around. Why are you letting men in here? This is a sex segregated spa. Why is this man in here? And the young woman, the staffer at the spa, and I feel a little bit bad for her because she's put in a bad position. She doesn't make it. But honestly, I felt like she was actually trying to morally justify it. She didn't seem to me to be just saying that this is the spa's policy or this is the state law. But she was invoking California state law. Well, we have to respect gender identity. You know, she says that's her gender identity. And this woman is not having it. You should look this up. We Spa. It's amazing. It is amazing. If she says that's her gender identity. So, what happens from all of this? Today, apparently, and this is ongoing right now as we record this, I've just seen a couple of reports. Some women organized a protest out in front of the spa saying, protect our sex-segregated spaces. And who's showing up to counter-protest? Antifa, those psychopathic scumbags. You want to find psychopaths? And I mean literal psychopaths, people with antisocial personality disorder. Go look at Antifa. It's a heat sink for them. Whenever you have a political group or a group of any kind who endorses violence, especially street violence, you're going to find casual psychopaths there. And people are popping off. I don't know who. I mean, I'm sure it's mostly Antifa assaulting other people, but I've seen people carrying around pipes and hitting them on the back of other people's heads. I don't know exactly what's going on. This will become more clear when I'm able to look at it. But some sleuth on the internet found what appears to be the man who was the so-called trans woman, whose dick was swinging in Wi Spa in the women's section. I cannot confirm this. I do think it's likely. I do think it's probably this guy, but I cannot confirm it. But I'll tell you why I think it is. So let's put up this image here. It was shown on social media. And the person who found this picture took a couple of screenshots from this guy's social media and said, "This is the woman from Wi Spa who was allegedly exposing her penis in the presence of a child." I cannot believe the things that come out of our mouths. Her penis. What world is this? So what you see here are two pictures. And on the left is a picture of a very obvious man. Appears to be between 25 and 30 years old. Lifting weights in a gym. Obviously has a male body. You can see the outline of his dick in his gym shorts, like with so many of them. And then another image next to it, which looks to have been plucked from this guy's social media. It might be Instagram, might be Twitter. I can't tell for sure. Let me read to you the caption underneath it. So this is an image from this guy's social media. And the image is a face, and I think it's his face, but I can't be sure, that looks like he's got saran wrap or a plastic bag over it, or like a vacuum seal. It is very... The feeling that you get, it evokes images of suffocation. It looks like extreme sadomasochistic sexual practices. It looks like something out of Silence of the Lambs. Surprise, surprise. His whole aesthetic, I went through his social media. This is his whole aesthetic. Think Marilyn Manson crossed with Buffalo Bill. That's what this guy looks like. Sadomasochistic, themes that suggest Satanism. Grisly. So he writes, oh, and his name, his screen name that he's chosen, Precious Child. Again, I cannot confirm that this was the guy or wasn't the guy, but I strongly suspect it was. I wonder if Precious is a reference to Buffalo Bill's dog, Precious. Put the lotion in the basket. So he says this. I have been called a, quote, vile monster trans for allegedly using the women's section of a nude spa in Los Angeles. Thankfully, that would be protected under California law. The body is not a crime in any manifestation. We all come from and are made of flesh. Oh, kawaii. That's an awfully strange non-denial, isn't it? I was called a vile monster trans for allegedly using the women's section of a nude spa. If you weren't there, why didn't you just say it wasn't you? Strange, isn't it? What else have we got here? Oh, and this guy too? Oh, notice this also. I'm sure you did, but I got to point it out. But thankfully, that would be protected under California law. A man calling himself a trans woman going into the nude section, the nude women's section of the spa. So I guess even if it wasn't him, he's saying, but if it were, it would be illegal, and that's wonderful. Right in front of your face. Right in front of your face. We'll revisit this next week when I look at the whatever coverage we can get out of this. I'm sure it won't show up on the news in any realistic or reasonable form. Thank goodness the journalist Andy No is covering this. Andy No, if you don't know him, is a journalist who has covered Antifa in the Pacific Northwest and has been brutalized beaten severely and put in the hospital. They want to murder him. They've got a bounty out on him. He's incredibly brave, and he's been exposing Antifa for what they're doing, and the mainstream media won't talk to him. The New York Times won't talk to him. They call him a conservative alt-right provocateur, this mild-mannered, sweet-faced gay man who has more balls than all of these bastards put together. So I want to leave you with one more in this topic matter, because I'm going to say it again and again and again. This is not just on Twitter. This is not just something that's happening on social media. We are not blowing this out of proportion. This is happening in the real world. This trans ideology that is taking over is affecting the real world. We have talked before about how there are now boys on girls' sports teams. We talked last week about 43-year-old Gavin Laurel Hubbard, who is representing New Zealand at the next Tokyo Olympics in women's weightlifting and bumped out the 21-year-old actual woman from New Zealand who actually won the weightlifting championship. And there is a campaign called Save Women's Sports, organized by women, that is going around the country trying to convince state legislatures to enact laws that would ban boys from being on girls' sports teams, ban them from competing for scholarships as girls and also at the college level, and more power to them. This happened in Ohio this week. There was a bill before the Ohio legislature having to do with collegiate athletics, and Republican Representative Jenna Powell introduced an amendment to this bill that would ban men from participating in women's sports. Look how she was received in the Ohio legislature.
Move to amend with Amendment 1594.
The chair has the amendment. The amendment appears to be in order. The representative may proceed.
Wonderful. The Save Women's Sports Act is a fairness issue for women to be able to achieve their dreams in athletics in our state, and is crucial to preserving women's rights and the integrity of women's and girls' sports. Across our country, female athletes are currently losing scholarships, opportunities, medals, education, and training opportunities. This amendment will require schools that are part of the OHSAA to designate separate teams for participants of the biological sex. No school interscholastic conference or organization that regulates interscholastics shall permit biological males to participate on athletic team or an athletic competition designated only for biological female participants.
Jesus. That still gets me when I watch it. What was going on, that noise in the background? That was a Democrat, that was more than one, but I know the name of one of them. That was a Democratic representative pounding his desk and screaming to shut her up. I'm sorry, this infuriates me. This infuriates me. It makes my heart race. You do not see this kind of behavior in legislatures. This doesn't happen. This is insane. Representative Michael Skindell, shame on you. How dare you? You bastard. And he wasn't the only one. I don't know the names of the other one. This was coming from the Democrats. I don't know if you could make it out with the audio transferring here, but not only was he pounding like this, he was screaming. The kind of screaming where you could hear that his throat was getting raw. And I would like to know why the chair standing up in the front of that House chamber did nothing. Why did I not see a gavel being struck down? Why was the chair not saying, order, order? Why was Michael Skindell and whoever was cooperating with him not escorted out of the room? That's also something you don't see. You do not see lawmakers engaging in this behavior, but you usually, when somebody gets really out of order, you don't see a chair sitting. I don't know who the chair is. He just stood there. He did nothing. He did nothing. No one stopped him. This is beyond disrespectful. It's frank intimidation. This is the Democrats. You want to know why I'm not on the left anymore? There you go. This is real. This is happening to real people in real state legislatures. It's deranged. I don't know how much longer this can go on. I have a sinking feeling that it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. We are living in an inverted reality. We're living in the upside down. We call the most desperate, insincere, phony, plastic constructions authenticity. We look at plastic surgery addicts and we say they've embraced their true selves, and we say that they are living authentically. The more sort of sentimental and histrionic the praise you see for this behavior, the more phony and pathological is the thing that they are praising. It's an exact reversal. It's a reversal. It's a narcissistic reversal. It's a psychological abuse tactic. Notice the kinds of behaviors that evoke that kind of praise, that over-the-top, sentimental, maudlin, oh my God, you're so beautiful. You are the most authentic woman I've ever seen. I am in tears of rapturous joy looking at you emerge like a butterfly from a chrysalis. What are they talking about? Getting your chin shaved, having your brow bone shaved off, girls having their breasts cut off before they're even 18 years old so that they can be a real man. Men having their testicles cut off and their penises inverted. This is brave and stunning and beautiful. And there aren't enough hearts in the emoji catalog to show how beautiful it all really is. My friend Carrie Smith has been posting a bit of scripture recently. Look at me. Look at the atheist quoting the Bible. It's right on point. Isaiah 5:20. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Darkness is not light. Wet is not dry. Men are not women. Abuse is not love. Artifice is not authenticity. Do not be persuaded to invert reality. Do not cooperate. Do not allow it. Do not stand by silently while other people do it. Talk back out loud, and do it in public. I'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening. Would you take just a minute right now and share our show on social media? On Disaffected, we take a close look every week at the abuse dynamics exploding in the dark and disordered world that we live in. Tell other people about us. We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us. And